What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. We are back. Some more UFC this weekend. Not a pay-per-view. We got spoiled with a very good pay-per-view last weekend, but still a very quality, high-end fight night card. It's an early morning one. We're going to Doha, Qatar for this one. A couple fun fights, a huge fight for the welterweight division. We're going to get into all of it. Before I do, as always, very quickly, thank you if you are here listening to the pod. I appreciate it more than you could ever realize. I really do. I say that every pod, and it's not me beating a dead bush. I truly do appreciate all the support. And a reminder that if you don't have time to watch a whole podcast, right, and I try to keep my podcasts pretty short. I try to keep them 45 minutes, absolute max. But I understand that that's 45 minutes of a very busy day for some people. So if there's specific parts of the podcast you don't care about, all my podcasts are time-stamped. In YouTube, it should segment it up already, and then on Spotify, I have the timestamps in the description. So for the example of this podcast, it'll show all the different fights that I talk about. If you only care about a couple of the fights, you can just skip to that segment, listen to those, and you don't have to listen to the rest. So I just wanted to put that as a reminder in case people weren't aware or don't really feel like sitting through 30 to 45 minutes of me yapping about some fights. But if you are here for that, I appreciate it, and we're going to get right into it. UFC Qatar, this is their first ever card here. Middle East, early fight card, 10 a.m. Main card start, I believe, 7 a.m. prelim start. We've got some really quality fights. They always stack up the Middle East cards, we know this, and we've got some really good fights. Main event, number 1 ranked Tsarukyan is taking on number 6 ranked Dan Hangman Hooker. What a weird fight. Arman's a massive favorite. Minus 550 is a 5-1 favorite right now. Hooker's a plus 375 underdog, which is kind of crazy considering that Arman hasn't fought in so long, but really neither has Dan, right? Arman's last fight was UFC 300 against Charles, which was, a year and a half ago. So that's been a while. And Hooker's was UFC 305 against Gamrot, which is a little over a year ago. So just kind of like these are two guys who have always been hanging around the rankings in this division, especially as of recently, and they're just really inactive, especially Hooker, like not just in the last year and a half, but like for a while. I mean, he's got, since the start of 2023, he's gotten in 2 fights, and it was Jalen Turner, which was a banger, and it was Gamrot, which was also a banger. For Dan Hooker, though, that Gamrot fight wasn't by any means a clear decision. Like many people thought Gamrot came out of that fight and won it. It wasn't a robbery, because anytime there's a close fight, saying it's a robbery is just doing the fight no justice, right? Anytime you leave it to the scorecards and you leave it a competitive fight, if it's a split decision victory, either way, you can't really complain. And that's what that fight was. But many people came from that fight and had it scored for Gamrot. And I understood it. I actually did have it scored for Hooker. Maybe that was the crowd. That was in Australia, so the crowd was behind him. Maybe the crowd reactions influenced me a little bit, like they might have influenced the judges. But I did think Hooker won that fight purely on a damage basis. I mean, he had Gamrot's eye just a mess in that fight. It was a really fun fight. It was really cool to see Gamrot in an exciting fight like that. But that was over a year ago. That was August of 2024, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it was September, but I'm pretty sure it was August. So obviously, it's been a while. For Arman, it's been even longer. Obviously, UFC 311, he was supposed to fight Islam at the beginning of the year, and then he has the back injury, which I think is pretty, unanimously, everyone just kind of assumes that was a weight cut thing. It's never been, I don't think it's ever been confirmed by Arman, his camp, or by, Dana or any of, the UFC guys, if it was a weight issue. But that's kind of what everyone speculates, just because Arman is, really jacked for a 155er. His physique is insane. And, it's hard to cut weight that way. Most people believe that, this is the case. But then again, I think Arman went on to make weight. There wasn't he a backup fighter at some point down the line? So he can make the weight. We know he can. But that was really bad for his reputation, because he was already on the UFC's bad side for punching a fan at UFC 300 on his walkout or whatever that was. And then he headlines a pay-per-view, the first pay-per-view of the year, the first pay-per-view at Intuit Dome in LA, and then he pulls out the day before the fight. That was bad. I was there. Me and my friends were in the building for that one, and we got to see Islam Moicano, which was funny at the time, but it's Arman Islam was going to be the greatest test of Islam's career up to that point. Now, what we just saw from the JDM fight, maybe Islam just steamrolls Arman like he's steamrolling everyone as of recently. But who knows? That was, from a stylistic point of view, that was a very close fight. And those two dudes had fought each other before. Now, Arman, he pulls out of that event, ruins the pay-per-view. They have to pull up Moicano. Dariush's fight gets pulled, and it was a mess. And that really put him in bad grace with the UFC. The UFC clearly has not liked him since, because he was rightfully the number one contender, and after that, they said, "Yeah, you're not getting a title shot right away." So this is kind of a number one contender fight in a way, which is wild, because in no world should Dan Hooker be fighting in a number one contender fight right now. But from what it sounds like, it just sounds like no one else was stepping up to fight Arman, right? So give Dan Hooker his props, because one, Arman's a scary dude, and two, like, I don't blame those other people, because Arman has pulled out of a fight and they're probably scared of the same thing happening. And I'm recording this on Wednesday night. If it ends up being Arman pulls out, then I'm done with this dude. Like, this dude should be cut if he pulls out of this one. But I would assume that won't happen. So, if that's the case, then Dan Hooker, props to him for stepping up to fight not only a dangerous dude, but a dude who could potentially pull out. Now, on the flip side, the other UFC lightweights, right, the Patties, the Gaethjes, the stuff, everyone at the top of that division outside of Charles right now is kind of like, yeah, I deserve to fight for the title. Yeah. To be fair, Patty has said he wants one more, even though it's rumored he might just fight Ilya. But this is a true number one contender fight, because Arman should be in a number one contender fight. Even though he pulled out, he's number one in the division. It's not like he's coming off of a loss. And Dan Hooker was the only one who stepped up to fight him, right? Because Gaethje sure as hell didn't. Patty, I don't know if Patty just couldn't get ready or what. Patty's going to be in the building for this one. I'll talk about that a little later. But this is a number one contender fight. And the only way it's not is if, Arman misses weight and then wins, or if it's just a complete dud of a fight, which I don't think it will be, because Dan Hooker always brings the action, and Arman Tsarukyan is a finisher. He finishes fights. His skill set, the reason everyone thought, oh, this was a good matchup against Islam, was because his skill set is very, very similar to Islam's. Now, different, but very similar. Arman is an elite wrestler, very elite takedowns. What he does better than Islam is Arman's ground and pound is nasty. Arman's ground and pound, the elbows he was throwing on Charles, we've seen it throughout his UFC career. Arman Tsarukyan's ground and pound is absolutely nasty. And when he's got as good of a takedown game as he does, and he's got submissions to his name, that makes him a nightmare for anyone. When you're fighting a good wrestler who can submit you, but more than anything will put damage on you when you're on your back. So that's why Arman's such a threat at 155. That's why he's been such a threat at 155. And he's got good striking on the feet as well. Probably, maybe better striking than Islam's. He's certainly got more KO power than Islam does. Not to make this an Arman versus Islam comparison, but obviously that's just, that was the fight that was supposed to happen in January. So, Arman's kind of become quite a buzzsaw, and he dropped a fight to Gamrot, which he lost. People think, no, he lost that fight fair and square. But besides that, he's really just been unbelievable in the UFC. And especially as of recently, he really fought an unbelievable fight against Charles Oliveira, which he won, right? Even though it was close, he won that fight. And then he KO'd Beneil Dariush, which obviously is kind of becoming a thing with Benny Dariush as of recently, but still, nonetheless. So Arman Tsarukyan's a threat. Dan Hooker, he's won 2 straight split decisions, but they've been really fun fights. And the thing about Dan Hooker that is he always comes to scrap, right? He always does, and he withstands damage very, very well. So it's one of those things where maybe Arman takes Dan down in round 1, cuts him, nasty ground and pound. Round 2, Dan's still going to be there to fight, right? He just is, right? Because that's the type of fighter Dan Hooker is. So, the fact that Hooker's a plus 375 underdog is kind of crazy to me, just because we know that Dan Hooker will walk into the fire and will put on these wars. And no person who fights like that should ever be this big of an underdog. But stylistically, yeah, Arman is the more skilled fighter. He's the younger fighter. He's the more athletic. He probably trains harder. This is a quote from Dan Hooker himself, where he's like, I would love to beat a guy that trains harder than me, is younger than me, faster than me, better striker, better whatever. So, yeah, Arman should win this fight, right? There's a reason he's a 5-1 favorite. But I know this is probably getting redundant on this podcast because I say this a lot, but it is disrespectful to the underdog here. This line is disrespectful at plus 375 just because Dan Hooker will walk into the fire and has pulled off some crazy fights and has had his moments against some of the best opponents. Like, ironically enough, the only opponent that really just like Dan Hooker didn't have a moment against was Michael Chandler, because Michael Chandler KO'd him so fast, and that's like one of the only wins Michael Chandler has to his name in the UFC. And then, of course, Islam did what Islam does to everyone. So, this will be somewhat of a testament to how legit Arman Tsarukyan is, because I don't love playing the MMA math thing, and I'm sorry to make it another comparison versus Islam, but Islam Makhachev, when he fought Dan Hooker, kind of walked through him and Kimura'd him, right? So is Arman Tsarukyan going to be able to do the same thing, right? You want to prove that you're an elite lightweight and you could have given Islam a tough test when he was champ? You want to prove that you can give Ilya a tough test as he's champ right now? Okay, go finish Dan Hooker, right? Because even though Dan Hooker's tough and he will go into the fire and walk into war, this is a winnable fight for Arman Tsarukyan, and this is a stylistic matchup that favors Arman Tsarukyan. So this will be a good litmus test for Arman, right? If you come in here, make weight, handle your business, you're next for Ilya, right? We can confidently say that, and that will be a very competitive and a good fight. If you miss weight, if you get into like a back and forth battle with Dan Hooker at this point in Dan Hooker's career, then okay, you're probably not next, and we probably got to either give it to Gaethje or, I can't believe I'm saying this, but give it to Paddy. So I like Arman nonetheless. Hooker is probably out of his prime, but we know he walks into the fire. We know he makes it a war. This is a litmus test. Arman Tsarukyan, take care of business. Put away a tough guy who has been put away by people with similar skill sets before. You do that, okay, we're good. You're the number one contender. So that's my take on this fight. I think Arman gets it done. But yeah, you got to do it like Islam did. You got to do it like Michael Chandler did. Dan Hooker, as good as he is, he's been put away before. Put him away, handle your business, get out of there. Co-main event. This is an equally important fight, and it sucks that this isn't 5 rounds. Obviously, we've heard from both sides saying, oh, they didn't want 5 rounds, whatever. Sucks that this isn't a 5-round fight because it should be, especially as a co-main event, but nonetheless a good fight. Number 2 ranked Belal Muhammad fighting number 6 ranked Machado Garry. We saw this last weekend in Madison Square Garden. We saw 3 welterweight fights. We obviously saw Islam win the belt, take it from Jack. We saw Prates KO Leon, and we saw Morales KO Sean Brady. And the theme walking away from UFC 322 at Madison Square Garden was this new generation of welterweights. Well, Machado Garry's nickname is the future, and he has kind of like, since he joined the UFC, been on this whole like, I am this new wave of welterweights, this new wave of 170 pounders. Okay, this is your time to prove it, because Belal isn't a part of this new generation, right? Bilal's part of this last generation, even though he held the belt, right, very recently up until May when JDM beat him in Montreal, right? This is a old generation versus new generation matchup. And if you want to continue this trend, Ian Garry, you got to go and you got to make a statement win against Belal Muhammad. Because I'll tell you what, the way that Madison Square Garden went, the way that this pay-per-view just went last weekend, could not have been better for Machado Garry. It could not have been better. Okay, let's look at it this way. Machado Garry has a win over Carlos Prates, right? So Carlos Prates getting a KO, and even though Prates is above him in the rankings, you would imagine if they're both coming off of wins, the UFC would give a title shot to Garry over Prates just simply because Garry beat him, right? Okay, so there's that one. Then you've got Morales. Okay, Morales just KO'd Sean Brady and jumped into the top 3. But guess who beat Sean Brady earlier in his career, and guess who was ahead of Sean Brady in the rankings prior to the UFC 322 card last weekend? It's Belal Muhammad. So if Ian Garry wins this fight, he takes Belal Muhammad's spot, which is above Morales, which is above Carlos Prates, and the only person above him in the rankings is JDM, who they're not going to give a title shot to because he obviously just lost the belt. Machado Garry, with a statement win here, becomes the number 1 contender. But this is what we've seen from the UFC in recent times, is winning fights is very important. Of course it's important. Winning is important in any sport, but it's the way you do it. And the UFC has continually shown, and we saw this start when they gave Khalil Roundtree a title shot back in October of, what was that, 2023? Maybe 2024. When they gave Roundtree that title shot against Pereira, That was the UFC saying, yeah, we're going to start giving title shots to our exciting fighters. We are. Okay. That's fine. You want to do that? That's fine. Ian Garry has not had a finish in a while, right? Even Neil Magny, even though he beat up Neil Magny, had him fighting on one leg, there's a clip of him saying, I took Neil Magny's soul. Okay, but you didn't finish him, right? You split decision Michael Venom Page in a fight that, like, I thought Michael Venom Page won, to be honest with you. I'm not saying it was a robbery, because no split decision is a robbery, but that was, that was a very close fight, and you couldn't get it done against MVP. Still, quality win. Okay, you fight Carlos Prates. Okay, main event, you looked phenomenal through 3.5 rounds. But that last round and a half, especially that 5th round, did not look good at all. Prates had you crawling, it was beating you up, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, me and Garry, even though like just looking at the rankings and looking at like win streaks and stuff, you should hypothetically be next for the belt if you win this fight. You got to do it in impressive fashion, because as the UFC has shown and is showing as of recently, winning fights isn't everything. It's the way you do it. They got to sell pay-per-views. They got to sell fights, especially Ian Garry. If he wins this and he's going to be next for the title, it's probably going to be one of the first Paramount cards of next year, right? You'd imagine like March or April or something like that, right, against Islam. Maybe not with Ramadan, but you know what I mean, right? It's your first year with Paramount, your first year with CBS, and you want him headlining a pay-per-view, it's got to be exciting. So Ian Garry had finishes early in his career, was very fun to watch, and he still is fun to watch. You can tell he's a very, very athletic fighter. He's a very smart fighter, right? You can tell in the way he speaks and in the way he fights. He's a big game planner. He always, like Michael Venom Page, even though Ian Garry is a kickboxer, he was not striking with Michael Venom Page. He just started grappling him, right? Same thing with Prates, right? He incorporated the grappling and incorporated a really genius game plan of throwing a bunch of head kicks, not for them to land, but just so it would make Prates hesitate with throwing his left hand, which, as we saw against Leon Edwards this last weekend, is a pretty good left hand. So this is Ian Garry has a skill set to fight for a belt and to win a fight like this, but he can't make it a boring decision, right? He just can't in this one. And lucky for him, he's fighting a guy which, unless Bilal just continues to lose brain cells and doesn't do it, Bilal is a wrestler, right? Bilal's path to victory will be to wrestle, because that's a part of his skill set, right? He's obviously not, he doesn't have the diverse takedown game that Islam does, right? But Bilal Muhammad is good at, okay, he throws these boxing combos, gets you on the fence, takes you down, right? That's Bilal Muhammad's game, and he's very good at it. For Ian Garry, that means, hey, you're fighting a dude who's a grappler who wants to get it down. This is your chance to show you're elite on the feet. You can beat him up. Even if it's like a 30-27 decision, that's fine. But if we walk out of this fight and Ian Garry wins, and it's a 29-28 unanimous decision with that final round going to the Bilal, or if it's a split decision that's like controversial as to who won that fight, you can't give him the title shot. It's probably going to go to Morales or maybe Ilya. I don't think they'll do Ilya, but maybe Ilya. So this is similar to how this was a big litmus test for Arman Tsarukyan in the main event. This is a big litmus test for Ian Machado Garry, because this welterweight division, it's on this new wave takeover. We saw it at Madison Square Garden when Morales won and when Prates won. It's this new generation taking over. You're a new generation fighter and you're fighting Bilal Muhammad. If you take care of business and you have an impact performance, a performance people will look at and go, wow, that was a great Ian Machado Garry performance. You're next for the belt. You get to fight Islam. So this is a huge fight for him. And I don't mean to make this just talking about Ian Machado Garry, because let's not disrespect Bilal Muhammad. The dude was the champion like 6 months ago, right? He lost his belt in May. And we've seen from Bilal Muhammad, he's got a style that's very difficult for people to handle. But the odds on this fight, Ian Machado Garry is a -270 favorite. He's a 2-1 favorite. Why is that? Probably because stylistically this fight does favor Ian Machado Garry. Ian Machado Garry is the much taller, much longer striker for sure. He's much more athletic and he's much more mobile on the feet. Where Bilal is a wrestler and will shoot takedowns, but he doesn't quite have the athleticism of the guys like Islam, where he can shoot from super far away or shoot in an instant like that. Because the guys who are really light on their feet, have really good footwork like Ian Machado Garry, right? And even like Jack Della Maddalena, right? It takes a really athletic wrestler to take them down. If you're not a super athletic wrestler, it's a little harder, and I don't think Bilal Muhammad's that athletic wrestler. There's a reason that Islam and Hamzat won the belts that they did and are so dominant like they are. It's because they're these grapplers, but they're such good athletes and they're so strong. I just don't view Bilal Muhammad in that way. So for that reason, I am taking Ian Machado Garry, right? If Ian Machado Garry wins a split decision, or it's a snore-fest fight and he wins it, or he loses this fight, he's fumbling his chance at fighting for the belt. But if he comes out and makes an impact performance, you give him the title shot. You have to, just based on merit, based on the wins that he's done, based on him being a company man and taking the Shavkat fight on short notice and the Protest fight on short notice, right? Like, the UFC will give it to him if he comes out and has a good performance. But if he doesn't, Michael Morales, step on up. You're next for Islam. So that's what makes this fight so fascinating. And I'm sorry that I got into such a rant about how, like, what this fight means for Ian Machado Garry in the division. Stylistically, like I mentioned it though, you know, Bilal is a very good grappler, very good wrestler, but he isn't quite the athlete that some of the other wrestlers in this division and in the UFC are. So for a guy who's very quick on his feet and will use his mobility to his advantage like Ian Machado Garry, I just think this makes for a difficult matchup for Bilal Muhammad. So give me Ian in this one, but very fun fight. Really excited for this one. And the welterweight division is the best division in the UFC right now. And if Ian Machado Garry comes out with a good win in this one, it makes this division that's already good even better. So, yeah, that's my thought on that one. I apologize. I'm like, if you're watching on YouTube, I've got this eye thing going on where I just start like tearing up in my right eye. So I promise, if it looks like I'm about to cry, I love the UFC. I don't love the UFC enough to start crying over it. I'm just dealing with this eye thing. But anyways, I'm going to start blinking out of it a bunch now. Number 9 ranked, Volkan Oezdemir, taking on number 14th ranked Alonzo Menifield. Menifield's one of those guys that's just always been at this spot. And kind of Oezdemir too. These are two light heavyweights who, one, hit very hard and will stand and trade, but also they've kind of like where they are in the rankings. Alonzo Menifield at like 14, he's like right at the cusp of the top 15, and then Oezdemir is at 9, right at the cusp of the top 10. These guys, it feels like they've been in this spot in the rankings for an eternity now. They're kind of two borderline gatekeepers, but they'll throw down. They've been in the rankings for a while, and I think the common theme between both these guys is they just really haven't been able to beat the high-level competition, right? They've always just been a step below those high-level 205ers in the light heavyweight division. So that makes this fight fun because it's high potential for a knockout, two guys that will throw, and that makes me lean Oezdemir. I just think Oezdemir has shown throughout his career he's a cleaner striker than Menifield is. He's got better fight IQ than Menifield. Menifield's fight IQ has been an issue at times, as we saw in the Carlos Ulberg fight when he just kind of sprinted at him on the belt when the fight started. So I like Oezdemir in this one. He's a minus 240 favorite, which is kind of, I always say this every fight. I feel like it gets so redundant. Kind of crazy just considering both these guys have knockout power. It's 205ers. It'll be a fun fight. It's a cool fight to have on a main card of a fight night like this. And yeah, I think Oezdemir gets it done just being the cleaner striker. Menifield will throw a little more crazier at times, and I just think the tighter, more orthodox striking wins in a battle of two 205ers with similar knockout power. So I like Oezdemir in this one. The next fight on the main card, this is a fun one. This is a really unique one. This is one I will definitely have my eye on. Jack Hermansson is a plus 200 underdog moving down a division against Mukbek Orolbai, minus 250 favorite who's moving up a division. I can't recall the last time we had a fight like this of a guy moving up a division versus a guy moving down a division. And for Hermansson, it's pretty concerning because if you don't remember, in late June, at International Fight Week, Gregory Rodriguez just absolutely murdered Jack Hermansson in the octagon. It was one of the most vicious KOs we've seen all year. And the hammer fist, the follow-up shot when Jack Hermansson was completely unconscious on the ground was crazy. That was one of those knockouts where you go, ooh, this guy might need to step away from the game for like a year or so. No, Jack Hermansson's back 5 months later, not even 5 months later, moving down a division, which typically coming off of a knockout isn't the best thing in the world. Like, typically you don't move down and drain your brain even more, but that's what Jack Hermansson's doing now. It's not like he was a huge 185er, so of the 185ers to do it, he's one of those where you can kind of understand it, but still a big weight cut, especially coming off of a knockout so recently. I don't know, it definitely worries me. But the thing that does give you a little hope is Orolbai. Orolbai's a phenomenal athlete, and his big issue in the UFC has been, one, he just gets into wars. Like the war he got in against Mateusz Rebecki was just wild. But Also, he's, like he's a good striker, but he's not like obviously his bread and butter is the ground game. And, that honestly helps Jack Hermansson a little bit because, like, you would think that Jack Hermansson is going to be the bigger guy considering he's the one moving down a division. But Orolbai is such a good grappler and he's so freakishly strong on the ground that I don't know if that's going to matter in this one. Orolbai's legit, man. He's got a legit ground game, vicious submissions, and he's good on the feet, right? It's nothing crazy, but he's very good on the feet. And I just think he might submit Jack Hermansson in this one. Hermansson's a little past his prime, and this feels like oftentimes for fighters, when they move down a division late in their career, that's kind of like their last grasp at like, oh, maybe I can stay in my prime a little longer. I mean, Jack Hermansson really isn't a guy who's in his prime. Inactivity has been a thing for him. So it is good that he's getting into the octagon for a second time this year. That's something he hasn't really been doing. But regardless, man, I just think this is a freakishly strong and freakishly good grappler in Orolbai. But it's a fun fight, and Orolbai's a fun fighter, and Hermansson's a fun fighter, and it makes it very unique considering this has got to be one of the first times. I mean, one of the most notable, probably the most notable fight I can ever remember of a guy moving down a division fighting a guy moving up a division, and the guy moving up the division is a 2-1 favorite. So I like Orolbai. I just think the ground game's too good, but there's a chance. We saw it with Zhang Weili, Shevchenko. Sometimes guys move up divisions, and they just it's just the size difference is too much for them, or it affects their weight cut too much. So I don't know. We'll see on this one. And there's a real chance that if the weight cut's too much for Hermansson, maybe it drains his stamina and just Orolbai just gasses him in round 2 and finds a submission. So regardless, very fun fight, very random fight. Orolbai's a fan favorite. Team Alpha Male guy. He's from I think Kyrgyzstan. Put Mikbek Orolbai. You'll see the picture of him on screen right now versus a picture of Valentina Shevchenko, and those two are from the same country. That's a fun exercise I like doing. What's up, everybody? This is a little different. I'm placing this clip in the middle of the podcast. So I recorded the podcast about 3-ish hours from this recording right now. And the fight next I was supposed to talk about was Sergey Spivak versus Shamil Gaziev, a heavyweight fight. Since I recorded that, I went, gassed up my car. I'm going on a road trip tomorrow. Then I check my phone and I go, oh my God, Waldo Cortes-Acosta is coming in for Sergey Spivak. He got pulled from the fight. I would imagine it was an injury or something like that. So now Waldo Cortes-Acosta is fighting. If you remember correctly, Waldo Cortes-Acosta fought at the very beginning of November against Antidelia, and that was a very controversial fight because he got eye poked, came back, and then knocked the dude out, and then was continuing to hold his eye in. And it's one of the weirdest, oddest fights I've ever seen in the UFC. Most people have ever seen in the UFC. Waldo Cortes-Acosta is turning around. It'll be 3 weeks later, I believe. 3 weeks later to fight Shamil Gaziev. This is a crazy thing to do just because of the simple fact that the guy that he's replacing, Sergey Spivak, he has a win over Sergey Spivak this year. And he's higher ranked than Sergey Spivak is. So Shamil Gaziev, granted he's been game planning for Spivak. Now he has to fight Cortes-Acosta, two completely different styles. But this is a wild, wild fight because this dude, Waldo Cortes-Acosta, what is this fight number 4 or fight number 5 on the year? And he's stepping in on 2 or 3 days notice. Obviously it's heavyweight MMA, so there's no weight cut. He doesn't have to worry about that. But he's fighting, and he was higher ranked than the guy that was originally fighting. So Shamil Gaziev has to switch up his game plan, but he's like, hey, if I win, I'm higher in the rankings than I would have been if I won against Spivak. So this is wild. What happened last week at MSG? Ethan Ewing replaces Cody Hatton. Ethan Ewing, on 48 hours notice, comes in and beats the most hyped up prospect in MMA, Malcolm Wellmaker. Now we've got Waldo Cortes-Acosta, who's been in the UFC, who fought a couple weeks ago. It's I'm taking this fight on 2 weeks' notice. It's not like Waldo Cortes-Acosta's in Qatar. The dude's from the Dominican Republic. It's not like this dude's hanging out in the Middle East and it's oh, I'm in the area. Granted, he's heavyweight. He doesn't have to cut weight. But just a wild, wild thing to do if I'm Cortes-Acosta. Very risky. But if he wins this, especially by knockout, because he's a much better striker than Gaziev was. Gaziev had the striking advantage against his previous opponent in Sergey Spivak. Now he doesn't. And if Cortes-Acosta comes out and KOs this dude, similarly how he KO'd Ante Delia earlier in the month, he's going to be in the UFC's good graces. Like, there's an argument that after the Cyril Gane rematch, maybe Waldo's next for Tom Aspinall, which is a wild thing to think about. But, the UFC loves activity, loves fighters that do stuff like this. And he's saving a pretty crucial fight on a main card, in the first main card in Doha, Qatar. All the props in the world to Waldo Cortes-Acosta. Personally, if I was in his position, and I'm not, obviously I'm sitting at home talking about him, not actually being him. If I was in his position, this is so risky. Like, it's one thing if, like, you're taking a short notice fight against someone who's higher up in the rankings. No, you're taking a short notice fight against a guy who's 11th ranked in the world. But props to him. He's anywhere, any place, ready to do it. He just had a pretty severe eye poke 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And now he's coming back, and he's like, yeah, I'm about that life. So really good for Waldo Cortes-Acosta. He's already got a win over Sergey Spivak this year. Obviously, he KO'd Ante Delia earlier in the year. He did lose to Sergey Pavlovich earlier in the year, a guy who's higher up in the rankings. Just an unbelievable, this is crazy. And if he pulls it off, we're going to have to talk a little bit differently about Waldo Cortes-Acosta than we have been, because it'll be a phenomenal performance. So this recording will be placed there. Now I'm going to get back to the next fight, which you're going to see in a second. The final fight on the main card, and originally this fight was supposed to be Alex Perez versus Asu Amabayev, which are two ranked flyweights, which I think is still a fun fight. That'll be, I'll talk about that a little bit. That'll be on the prelims. But number 11, Tagir Ulanbekov, is fighting Kyoji Horiguchi, making his return to the UFC for the first time since 2016? So Horiguchi is a legit fighter. And even though it's been 9-ish years since he was last in the promotion with the UFC, Horiguchi is a legit fighter. And in that 9 years, he's been in Rizin and he's been in Bellator, which obviously are two of the best non-UFC fight promotions there are. And even in the UFC, his one loss in the UFC was against Mighty Mouse. He didn't lose another fight in the UFC. So Horiguchi is a really, really good fighter. He's making his return. He's a plus 165 dog, which is to be expected because he's fighting Tagir Ulanbekov, who is a huge flyweight, like just a massive 125er. He's a Khabib gym guy. He's a Dagestan guy. He's had some issues in his career for sure. He lost the fight against Tim Elliott, which I get it. Tim Elliott's a tough veteran to fight, especially young in your career like Tagir was when he fought him. His last time around, he fought Azat Maxim, and Maxim took it on relatively short notice. Maxim's a guy who just got cut from the UFC, and Maxim took him to a tough decision. I did see some people thinking maybe Maxim won that fight. I didn't think that was the case, but Tagir, for being a Dagestan gym guy, being a Team Khabib guy, he just hasn't been nearly as dominant of a force as the other guys like Umar, Islam, obviously Khabib, Usman, and Bellator. He hasn't really been as dominant of a force as those guys are. I think it's kind of a weight issue, and we'll see. This is another guy. We talked about Arman. This is another guy that I'm recording this on Wednesday night. If he ends up missing weight, that's tough. That's really, really tough, and he's done it before. He was supposed to fight Joshua Van at one point, and he missed weight, and he is a massive 125er, and I just think his frame would be better suited for 135, and he's young in his career, so I think he could really grow into the 135 frame. But he's here, and he's fighting a guy who's making his return to the UFC for the first time in a while, but Kyoji, like I said, Rizin, Bellator, those are the two promotions he primarily fought in that time away from the UFC, and he fought legit opponents. He beat Manel Kape. He beat Kaya Sakura, who we've seen in the UFC, who we saw fighting for a UFC title. And yeah, he does have some losses to his name. He lost to Patchy Mix, who is kind of just a mythical fighter in Bellator. The second he stepped out of Bellator, he lost all his skills, but in Bellator, Patchy Mix was a dog. And Sergio Pettis, who we've seen is a dog in Bellator. So, yeah, he's got some losses to his name, but he's got some really good wins. Manel Kape and Kaya Sakura are really good wins. And I remember when Kaya Sakura, when it got announced about a year ago that he was going to fight Pantoja at UFC, what was that, 310? I remember when that got announced, and there were many people thinking they got the wrong Rizin fighter to throw into a main event spot. Many people went into that thinking, hey, Kyoji was the better Rizin guy. He was the better fighter than Asakura was. He beat Asakura. Now, granted, Asakura beat Kyoji before they went 1-1. They both knocked each other out, ironically enough. But many people going into that fight thought, hey, Kyoji's the guy who should rightfully be jumping into a title shot, not Kaya Sakura. And those people who said that have been very, very right, because Kaya Sakura is now 0-2 in the promotion. It sounds like he's moving up to 135. Kyoji, who isn't nearly as big as Kaya Sakura, was fighting at 135 at Bellator and stuff. Now he gets to fight at a weight class that I think is going to be more natural for him. I mean, that's where he fought when he was in the UFC prior. I think I like Kyoji in this one. I really do. I just think Tagir has a pretty aggressive weight cut. We've seen him be very inconsistent at 125. Kyoji has 15 KOs to his name, 5 submissions to his name, and underdog money. Yeah, dude, give me Kyoji Horiguchi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Fun fight, though. Fun fight, because Kyoji's like a legit force, and this was a fight that previously got scheduled, I think, for Baku earlier in the year in June, and it's been really swept under the rug leading up to this card. Really, really fun fight. Tagir could easily implement the game plan that all those Dagestan guys do, and we've seen him do throughout his career, and just be dominant. But I think Kyoji's like a legit force in this division. So, yeah, man, give me Kyoji Horiguchi plus 165 to win this fight. And that is the main card. I went through it all. So, in summary, I've got Armin, Dan Hooker. Armin should take care of that. Ian should take care of Bilal in the co-main event, but like I said, litmus test for both those guys. I got Volkan beating Alonzo Menifield. Sorry there wasn't much analysis for that one. They're kind of just two like randomly generated light heavyweights who are both very good and have knockout power. Talked extensively about Hermansson, Orolbai. That's a fun fight. Spivak, Gaziev, Tagir, Horiguchi. Let's talk about the prelims a little bit. There's some notable things. I won't dive into a bunch of fights like crazy. The feature prelim is Bogdan Grad versus Luke Riley. If anyone doesn't know who Luke Riley is, Cage Warriors guy from the UK. He fights out of Paddy's gym. Very, very exciting fighter. Very fun fighter. He's fighting Bogdan Grad, who's one of those like just guys that just like goes to war every time and just fights at like an insane pace. He's a really fun fighter. Luke Riley is a really fun fighter. I think this fight has a chance to be a banger. Luke Riley is the much more skilled fighter, so you would imagine that'll be the difference in this one, but still a very, very fun fight. I'm going to skip down a couple prelims because Luke Riley's teammate, another guy that fights out of that Paddy Pimblett gym, Shamrock, is fighting Narulo Aliyev. I hope I say that name right. Aliyev's an undefeated guy, and Shamrock's a pretty sizable underdog to him, but Shamrock's another guy that was really exciting out of the UFC. He's 12-1-1. Like, he's got a very good record to his name. 2 Cage Warriors guys, 2 Manchester guy or Liverpool guys who fight out of Paddy's gym, debuting on this card, which makes things very, very exciting. I'm looking forward to watching both those guys fight. Dalby is fighting Nicholas Dalby. He always brings some good wars. Alex Perez, Almabayev, that's a ranked flyweight fight. That was the fight that was supposed to be on the main card and got bumped for Tagir and Horiguchi, which I'm okay with. That should be justified. Alex Perez has really good power in his hands for a flyweight, and Almabayev is a legit grappler and a fun fighter, and he really is. And the only loss to his name in the UFC was Minnow Kopp, and there were some eye pokes in that one. Minnow Kopp was beating him up, but he threw a 1-2 eye poke, and that was a weird fight. But nonetheless, Minnow Kopp is Minnow Kopp, obviously. So you can't blame Almabayev for losing that fight, especially after it was on somewhat short notice. That was supposed to be Brandon Royval, Minnow Kopp. And then other than that, Topuria, Alexander Topuria, Ilya's brother, who's a bantamweight, is fighting Beksat Almakhan, who is a legit good fighter. Like, knocked down Umar Nurmagomedov when he fought him on short notice, and knocked out Brad Katona in Montreal. And Brad Katona is a guy who'd never been knocked out before. I could easily see Topuria losing this one, and the odds agree. It's an even fight. The odds are even. Topuria is a force, right? He is. He uses his grappling a lot more than Ilya does at this point in Ilya's career, but I mean Topuria's only 6-1 in his career, so his older brother definitely has more experience, being what's Ilya, 17-0, 18-0 at this point. It'll be a really good fight, really fun fight. 2 really skilled guys at bantamweight, really fun fight. And then I'm looking if there's anything. I mean, Ryan Loder, he won the Ultimate Fighter. He's fighting. It's a fight night, so you can't expect the prelims to be unbelievably stacked, but still some really fun fights. And I think more than anything, the prelims are littered with like fun fighters to watch. Okay, I want to see how Shamrock does in his UFC debut. Okay, obviously you want to see how Topuria does for the Topuria name. You want to see how Luke Riley does in his debut. So that's fun, but the main card's where it's at with this one. Very excited. UFC Qatar, baby. I might have talked more about this card than I did for the MSG card when I previewed that one. Probably not. But regardless, very excited for this weekend. Some good fights. I appreciate everyone being here. As always, NFL Preview Pod will be coming your way, and you'll see a different backdrop behind me because I'm going home. I'm going to be back at home, not going to be at college like I am right now. And we'll preview NFL Week 12. I'm going to be in the building for Niners-Panthers for that one. That'll be fun. And yeah, I appreciate everyone being here. If you are, as always, let's watch some fights this weekend. I'll see you later.